I'm asking who's at fault here for you both not being able to have kids? Do you realize what you've been doing the last 3 years? My husband and I live in his parents' house. My mother-in-law, furious, confronted us with these words as we just got home. My husband, sensing something off with her, stood in front of me as if to protect me. Having married the man I love and moved in with his parents, I've been on the receiving end of my mother-in-law's snide comments daily for 3 years. The reason being, we didn't have children. I do want children someday, yet, thinking about working while raising them, I know there will be many challenges. My mother-in-law didn't care about such complexities and blamed me regardless. Every day I dodged her sarcasm and endured her blunt demeanor, but it seems it wasn't enough, and I couldn't take it anymore. One day coming home, I found my room completely empty. Clothes, bags, bedding, even the book I was reading, all gone without a trace. Shocked by the turn of events, I was at a loss. My husband frantically searched and found everything stuffed in bags, discarded at a nearby trash site. Furious at such treatment, my husband confronted my mother-in-law, who, unrepentant, scolded me instead. You're thinking about it? All lies. A spoiled, fraudulent idiot of a wife who can't even have children. My mother-in-law glared at me with intense hatred. Then, suddenly screaming, she tried to push my husband aside and grab me. Mom, stop it! My husband tried to block her, but my mother-in-law reached out for me with incredible force. Frozen by her rage-filled expression, I couldn't move. A daughter-in-law who can't give me grandchildren is useless. Just go back to the countryside. My name is Nicole. I'm 31 and currently work for a company. Leaving my rural hometown for college, I experienced city life for the first time. Living alone, I focused on my studies. Interested in economics, I attended lectures and worked part-time, leading a busy student life, which helped me land a job as an accounting clerk. I've been in touch with my parents back home a lot, maintaining a good relationship. Every vacation, I'd return to the countryside, enjoying time with family and friends, then head back to the city recharged. I met Tanner, who would later become my husband, a few years after joining the company. He's 3 years older, working in the planning department as a principal. One day at a company event, aimed at building good workplace relationships, I ended up sitting next to Tanner by chance. Though we didn't have much in common initially, casual conversations revealed his personality, and I eagerly engaged him in dialogue. Tanner was bright yet calm and kind. I was completely drawn to him, and started making overt gestures, like always greeting him when I saw him at work, or coincidentally catching the same train home. Like a middle school girl trying to catch his attention. Eventually we started going out for meals after work, and after a few dates, he asked me out. I was overjoyed. Being noticed by Tanner, whom I admired, felt like being called to heaven. Our relationship flourished, leading to an engagement. First, we visited my hometown for a family meeting. Both my dad and my husband were nervous, their faces red, but they hit it off over shared interests in alcohol and food. Our future seemed smooth and problem-free. Visiting his parents' house, I met my mother-in-law, Irene, for the first time. She welcomed me with a smile. She made an effort to ease my nerves by bringing up various topics, including my hometown. I felt genuinely reassured by her warm and kind demeanor. Okay, I'm going to use the restroom, said Tanner, feeling it was safe to leave us alone. Once he left the living room, Irene suddenly asked me, So, when are you planning on having kids? What? Tanner gets mad when I ask him that. Boys like planning, right? You understand being a woman, Nicole, right? Irene finally said it out loud. I was shocked by her sudden question and couldn't hide my surprised expression. What do you mean by understand? What exactly? I never expected to be asked about having children even before we got married, so I asked her timidly. But Irene answered as if it were the most natural thing. If you're married to my son, isn't it pointless if you don't have children? She smiled as if to say it was obvious. Of course, I want to understand her excitement about having grandchildren from her only son. I also wish to give my parents grandchildren, but shouldn't discussions about having children be a matter between the couple? And I didn't marry him just to have children. What would Irene think of me if I couldn't bear children? My heart was in turmoil, filled with anxiety. While I was hesitating to speak, my husband returned. Then Irene shifted the conversation away from children to talk about my late father-in-law. My husband passed away shortly after Tanner became an adult. He worked hard every day, and thanks to his inheritance, we managed to get Tanner through college. And now I'm getting by with part-time work. Nicole and I are planning to move to an apartment nearby after getting married. I want to give you peace of mind after everything you've gone through. You say that, but when you're busy, you'll just call me over for chores and cooking, won't you? Tanner and Irene were having a lively conversation. I couldn't forget the earlier conversation and managed a nervous smile. Then the conversation shifted to trivial complaints about her part-time job and how hard it was because she had to stand all the time. The topic of children never came up again. I was puzzled by Irene's real intentions, but convinced myself that she was just anxious to see grandchildren, and that's why she spoke like that. Despite moments of unease, we completed our visit without incident and left the in-laws' house. A few months into our marriage, my husband, looking worried, told me that Irene had injured herself. She fell down the stairs and hurt her leg. She can't do much by herself and asked if we could help take care of her. Her house is close by, so I plan to check on her every day for a while, but can you help if it's really necessary? My husband asked, seeming hesitant to bring it up. After we got married, Irene hadn't said anything about children, and I was starting to think that I'd just misunderstood her earlier comments, which was a relief. So I nodded and said, "Of course." Irene's injury was serious enough that she needed a cast on her leg. Forced to manage on one leg, at least until she got used to it, Tanner ended up visiting her daily. On a day Tanner was away on a business trip, I visited her instead. Irene asked me outright while we were alone, "What are your plans about grandchildren? It's unlikely within this year, isn't it? Are you continuing with any efforts to get pregnant?" Her tone was casual, as if she was asking about everyday chores, catching me off guard so much that I was momentarily speechless. The content was so presumptuous that I struggled with how to respond. Thinking it wrong to outright deny, I tried to stay calm and said, "Oh, Tanner and I will discuss that together." Indeed, we had already agreed not to rush into having children, considering Tanner himself said that. It seemed he was unaware of Irene's wishes for grandchildren. "Even if you discuss that, there's a matter of age, right? You know you can't stay young forever, don't you, Nicole?" "It's not like we won't consider children for the next 10 years or anything. We'll decide after properly discussing it, just the two of us." Though Irene seemed unsatisfied, she backed down for the moment. I felt a cold realization that what was said during the family meeting wasn't just my imagination. My heart trembled. Then Irene brought up a completely different topic. She suggested we move out of our apartment and live with her. "Live together?" I exclaimed. "With this injury, it's tough to manage on my own, and thinking about if something like this happens again, I'm scared of living alone. There'll be days Tanner can't make it, right? It's also a burden to keep asking you to come over." Irene mentioned having to take a long break from her part-time job and her financial worries. Unable to decide on my own, I brought it up with Tanner, who seemed somewhat inclined towards the idea. "It's not far from our current place, and considering the hassle of attending to every injury or illness of Mom, might be easier if we lived together." Tanner continued in an unclear manner. It seemed he was worried about causing me trouble, which apparently held him back from speaking up. Though there was awkwardness regarding the children issue, I understood that he truly cared for Irene. Since he hadn't done anything overtly problematic beyond words, I couldn't strongly object. Eventually, we moved out of our apartment and started living with Irene. As we both worked, we usually left Irene at home during the day, but as a clerk and with my husband often away on business, our return times varied greatly. After moving in together for a while, Irene began to target me with her snide comments, only when Tanner was not home. Naturally, the comments were about having children, plans for the future, the risks of having children at an older age. She even started sending me pamphlets, like those given out at gynecology clinics, wondering where she got them from. "You know, your physical strength declines as you get older, so it's definitely better to have children sooner rather than later, to avoid regrets. Raising children isn't just the daughter-in-law's concern, you know. If it takes longer for you to conceive, I'll be getting older too." "Yes, but we're still thinking about it, so..." "Of course, you and Tanner should ultimately do as you please, but homes with grandchildren seem so joyful, don't they? Just think positively about it." Despite being pricked by her words, I had no choice but to endure and respond, "Yes, we'll discuss it." Living in the in-laws' house, I couldn't afford to be kicked out. I considered talking to Tanner, especially now as he was approaching a promotion and was very busy. Not wanting to add to his worries, I ended up bearing it alone. Eventually, Irene's foot healed, but then I was already wishing to stop living together and was discreetly looking for an apartment nearby to move out. Yet, just days later, Irene injured her arm. She couldn't dodge a falling object at her part-time job and had to put her hand out to break her fall. I was called from work to help with the hospital visit and paperwork. Tanner, having been informed, was waiting with a worried look. As soon as she saw Tanner, Irene clung to him, half crying. "I'm really sorry, and Nicole too, for causing trouble due to my carelessness." "Mom, don't say that. How's your hand? Does it still hurt?" "There's no pain. I've got painkillers. To think I've had such a series of accidents. I wonder what's going to happen next. Tanner comforted her, saying, "It's okay, it's just a string of bad luck." For a while, Irene pretended to cry. Then lifting her face, she turned a smile towards me. "I'm really glad we're living together. I'm sorry for always causing trouble. I'll try to help around the house as much as I can, but it's hard with just one hand. Nicole, don't be mad at me, okay?" "No, it's fine. I'm just glad your injury isn't serious." I managed to respond, but I guessed Irene didn't feel bad at all. However, I couldn't just leave an injured person alone, so I continued to take care of her. Her hand injury wasn't severe, as long as she didn't lift heavy objects or move it excessively. Household chores and daily activities shouldn't be a problem. Yet Irene seemed to have gotten used to leaving everything to me. "Nicole, about today's dinner, I don't want anything greasy. Also, anything that requires a fork and knife tires out my hand, so I'd prefer something I can eat with a spoon." "How about beef stew?" "That sounds good. Well, it was Tanner's payday the day before yesterday, right? Let's splurge him some nice beef." "We shouldn't be too extravagant. It's not good for our finances." "I'm not saying to use this good beef for everything. Just adding a little bit of a good cut can enhance the flavor. Besides, it's never a loss to get good nutrition regularly in case you get pregnant. Well, unless you say there's no such plan." She wielded unreasonable demands and finished with a verbal jab. These conversations repeated daily, gradually wearing me down. Yet being dependent on this living arrangement, I would be at a loss without it. Perhaps Irene suggested living together to block my way out. It was a terrifying thought, and I tried to shake it off time and again. Our relationship was twisted, but I told myself it was just a matter of enduring until her injuries healed. With that in mind, I kept silent to avoid causing any further issues. 3 years had passed since we got married. Even after her arm healed, Irene would complain of lingering pain, claiming she couldn't even carry shopping bags from the grocery store, and gradually began to neglect the household chores she initially helped with. Yet she didn't hesitate to criticize the cleaning and cooking I did, or rush me about having children, maintaining her dismissive attitude towards me. It seemed she decided never to mention the subject of children to Tanner, who remained unaware. Trapped in this cohabitation and accumulating stress, I found myself becoming immune to her snide remarks, dodging Irene's interrogations without confronting the issue. From Irene's perspective, my behavior must have been intolerable. One day, an incident that clearly showed her inner frustration occurred. When we came home from work, Tanner and I were shocked to see the house transformed. My belongings from the second floor room, clothes, bags, bedding, even books had all vanished. It wasn't ransacked by a thief, but cleared out, as if movers had targeted this room alone, leaving a neatly arranged empty space. "What's going on?" Tanner, clearly shocked, hurried to check the other rooms, the shed in the yard, and around the neighborhood. I checked the closet too, but not even a single lipstick was left, which left me so stunned I just sat down, drained of strength. Eventually Tanner came back, making a loud noise. He was carrying 2 or 3 trash bags bulging with clothes and bags. Realizing they were all my belongings, I screamed. "My clothes? Why?" "Everything, including the mattress and dresser, were dumped at the trash site. I recognized your clothes, but let's go check everything together later." It seemed everything that had been in my room that morning was now abandoned there. Only Irene had the freedom to enter and exit her home besides us. Though Tanner initially hesitated, his face paling at the thought, he eventually went downstairs to confront her in her room, demanding if she knew anything. Irene confessed calmly. "I did it." "Mom, why would you do something like this, as if you're trying to drive me out?" Why don't you think about it deeply?" "What kind of nonsense is that?" "What do you mean?" When Tanner scolded her, Irene slammed her hands on the table with a bang. The harsh sound made both Tanner and I involuntarily flinch. "Do you realize what you've been doing these past 3 years?" At that moment, Tanner quickly stood in front of me. Perhaps he thought Irene was going to grab me. She glared at me over my husband, her eyes filled with hatred. "Whose fault is it that you don't have kids? All you do is lie, saying you're planning and thinking, but you've never considered having children. A spoiled, fraudulent idiot of a wife. Useless for not being able to have children." Tanner stood between Irene and I, protecting me from any harm she might inflict. Irene's drastic change was unmistakable from the side of his face. Filled with shock, the realization that she had intended to drive me out by disposing of my belongings made me feel more indignant than sad. I hadn't anticipated such treatment after enduring her tactless remarks every day for 3 years. Irene pointed at me with a furious expression. "A woman who can't produce grandchildren is no use to my son. Just go back to the countryside." Finally, Irene stood up, trying to get past Tanner to grab me. Mom, stop! Tanner managed to hold her back, but she continued to yell. Let go! I'll make that stupid woman understand. Irene, frail and weak, had no chance against him. While Tanner restrained her without causing injury, he urged me, Just take your things and leave. In a panic, I grabbed a few trash bags and fled the in-laws' house. Behind me, Irene's shrieks of, Liar! Shameless! echoed. Tanner somehow calmed Irene down and left the house to meet up with me. We decided to get a room in a nearby business hotel to talk about our future. Seeing Irene transformed so drastically must have exhausted him. He slumped onto the bed, disheartened. What's happened to Mom? I felt sorry for the weary Tanner, but I was determined. I laid bare everything Irene had done to me, rushing me about having children before we were married, her daily snide remarks, not sparing any details of her behavior. It was painful for me to share this with Tanner, whom I deeply cared for his family. However, after hearing everything, Tanner, tears in his eyes, apologized, saying, I'm sorry I didn't notice. The reason you couldn't talk about it sooner was my job, right? I'm sorry for making you worry so much. I wanted to spare you trouble because of Mom, but I ended up taking you for granted. It's not your fault. I've been regretting not talking about it sooner myself. If I had, things might have turned out differently. Anyway, I'm on your side, not Mom's. Please believe me. Tanner and I held hands discussing our future throughout the night. Then, before the trash truck arrived, we recovered our belongings from the trash area. With nowhere to store them, Tanner got us a rental storage unit from an acquaintance where we moved the larger items. From those, we only took what we needed for our hotel stay. Since we had no intention of returning to the in-laws' house, we spent the next few days living in the hotel. The search for a new place began the next day. Using our leave days and in between work, we managed to sign a lease for a rental we found. Together, we also went to complete the necessary administrative tasks. After finishing these procedures, we visited the in-laws' house about 2 weeks later to inform Irene of our decision. We weren't allowed inside, so the conversation took place at the entrance. Unfortunately, Tanner and I decided to divorce. Irene, who looked at me as if I were filth, was delighted when presented with the official documents indicating our divorce application was processed. We had chosen to part ways. Next to me, a disheartened Tanner heard his mother say, I'll find you a nice girl, with a disturbingly gleeful laugh. Men always have trouble with women no matter their age, but this time Mom will help you. I'll introduce you to someone much better than this country bumpkin. With a spiteful smile, Irene left us and went back inside as if she had finished her business. Tanner stayed at the house, and I was to move my belongings to my new home. We exchanged glances and parted ways then. As the seasons changed, my first Christmas after the divorce arrived. Suddenly a frantic call from Irene came. What is this card? This Christmas card? Christmas card? Our baby is born. What does this mean? Without any greetings, Irene was flustered. After speaking rapidly and intensely on the phone, she suddenly raised her voice, exclaiming, And why is the name all wrong? Why is Tanner's name on it? You two were supposed to be divorced. The joint Christmas card we sent to my in-laws had a photo attached, a picture of a couple holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. Of course, the one holding the baby was me, and standing next to me was my husband Tanner. Since the names were also joined, it clearly wasn't a stranger resembling Irene's son. From her perspective, the son and his wife, who were supposed to be divorced, were living together, and the son's wife, whom she thought was infertile, had a child. It must have been a completely baffling situation for her. Shortly after the supposed divorce, Tanner had told Irene, I've been assigned to work alone. The plan was to distract Irene a bit longer, but unable to endure her daily attempts to introduce him to women, he left, saying, I'll marry a younger girl when work calms down, as a painful excuse. Surprisingly, Irene was convinced by this. The solo assignment was a lie. Tanner's destination was my new home. We found a spacious family-type house to live as a family, and I had furnished it before he arrived. Thus, we were able to resume our life immediately, returning to a couple's life without Irene, just like when we were newlyweds. And Tanner remarried, took my maiden name. Therefore, the last names on the Christmas card were my maiden name. The address was my parents', a decision made in consultation with them. We had no intention of revealing our true address. The baby I was holding was our beloved daughter. In fact, just before Irene drove us out, I went to my OB/GYN because I wasn't feeling well and discovered I was pregnant. Tanner had suggested, maybe it's time we started thinking about having a child. And I was successfully pregnant. After sharing the joyful news together, Tanner suggested, we should tell Mom too. It's our first grandchild. She'll be thrilled. At that moment, my husband still didn't know Irene's true nature. I grimaced and quickly said, I want to tell her myself, to keep him from saying anything. But then the incident of us being driven out occurred, and the opportunity to speak up was lost. Pregnant, Tanner desperately protected me. Feeling frightened by Irene's drastic change, we decided not to inform her about the pregnancy for the safety of the child and I. Moreover, when we checked the belongings Irene intended to discard, a surprising fact was revealed. Among my personal items were small luxury brand purses and jewelry, items for special occasions. None of these valuable items were found in any trash can. Suspicious, we inquired at our local recycle shops and discovered that all the missing luxury items had been cashed in. Irene had not only thrown away the belongings, but also pocketed the cash from the high-value items she sold. Tanner was completely disillusioned by his mother's greed. We have to show her she can't get away with this. We decided to silently cut all ties with Irene, opting for estrangement. After that, we went through processes like signing a lease for an apartment and proceeding with a fake divorce. Irene, completely deceived by our coordinated story, remained unaware of the truth up to this day. However, surprisingly, she clapped her hands and exclaimed in joy, "Well done!" Driven by her desire for a grandchild to the extent of driving me out, Irene, as if forgetting years of terrible treatment, encouraged, "If that was the case, you should have told me sooner. It's okay to come back. The fact that you're taking your last name can't be helped, but she's still my grandchild." "I'm sorry, but we have no intention of letting you meet the child. We just want to inform you that she was born safely. Please don't contact us anymore." "What are you talking about? Just come and show her without complaining. Tanner's there too, right?" Irene began shouting over the phone. Unable to stand it, Tanner and I faced the phone together, and Irene immediately switched her tone to a sweet voice for Tanner. "Oh, isn't Nicole terrible? Misunderstandings between a son's wife and mom happen in every family, right? I'm saying I'm forgiving her, so bring the grandchild and come back soon. Your mother has hurt her back and I can't move." But my husband wasn't deceived and responded fatly. You said the pain from your arm injury was constant until just before we were about to divorce, but if you can carry a heavy dresser down from the second floor to the trash, I doubt a backache is much trouble for you." Faced with Tanner's cold rebuttal, Irene fell silent. He added more. "I know we've been lied to a lot. I can't trust you anymore. I don't want to see you, nor do I want you to see our child. We've moved far away. Please don't come looking for us. I don't want to raise our child to be a liar or a thief." "A thief? Tanner, how can you speak to your mother like that?" Irene might have been at a loss for words, but when accused of being a thief, she raised her voice sharply. I quickly interjected. "You sold my purses and necklaces without permission, right? I could report that as theft. Even though it's family, it's still punishable by law according to the lawyer I consulted." My stern words made it clear she couldn't escape, and silence returned from the other end of the phone. In fact, I'd already contacted a lawyer who confirmed it would constitute theft. Among the items sold were heirlooms from my deceased grandmother and my engagement ring. Although we couldn't get those irreplaceable items back, we managed to demand and obtain compensation without filing a police report. Through a lawyer, we somewhat understood why Irene was so desperate for a grandchild. It was because she was envious of a coworker of a similar age who always boasted about her grandchildren. Irene's part-time job environment was highly cliquey, and she competed as a dominant personality. Trying to compete with another wealthy coworker, she secretly bought brand items, pushing her into financial strain. Thinking, "If I'm throwing them out anyway, they won't be missed." She sold my belongings. After all her manipulations, Irene ended up estranged and alone. Later, she genuinely fell down the stairs and got injured. Unable to live alone, she ended up staying with relatives of the deceased father-in-law. Due to the move, Irene quit her part-time job, but she's still of working age. Yet at the relative's house, she complains loudly about having to work with another incomprehensible old person, becoming a nuisance to the entire family. Even though her injuries have healed, there's still outstanding compensation to be paid. The need to work longer hours seemed to be a bigger issue than the relationships at her former part-time job. And with her personality, it's easy to imagine she would struggle in a new workplace as well. At one point, we, along with our daughter, visited my parents' home. They greeted our adorable granddaughter with a warmth I'd never seen before. Despite causing various troubles, including the divorce and my husband taking my maiden name, my parents have always been supportive of us, even from afar. Having such a supportive family likely made it possible for Tanner and I to face Irene. As spring arrived, my husband's hard work was recognized, and he finally received a promotion. I plan to get a certification and take the promotion exam as soon as I return from maternity leave. Our cheerful and beautiful daughter is growing up healthy and strong. We finally achieved peaceful and fulfilling days.